France has unexpectedly found itself at the center of a major geopolitical scandal, already being described as one of the most dangerous in recent years. According to Le Monde and Reuters, citing sources in the French Ministry of Defense, an elite French Special Forces unit intercepted and detained a Russian tanker belonging to the so-called Shadow Fleet off the coast of Normandy. The scandal lies in the fact that the tanker was in international waters at the time of the operation, raising questions about the legality of Paris's actions. Nevertheless, the crew was detained along with the vessel, which was towed to the port of Cherbourg. At an emergency press conference, Emmanuel Macron stated that French intelligence services had evidence that drone launches against targets in Denmark and other northern European countries could have been carried out from this vessel. According to him, this was not an ordinary tanker, but a military element of the Kremlin's hybrid strategy. The president stressed that France would continue to detain such vessels if they posed a threat to European security. In effect, Paris has assumed the right to act preemptively, even beyond its territorial waters. Moscow's reaction was swift. Speaking at the Valdai Discussion Club, Vladimir Putin called France's actions pure piracy and a direct violation of international maritime law. However, according to Financial Times sources citing Kremlin insiders, Putin's public statements are only the tip of the iceberg. Behind closed doors in Moscow, discussions are underway about escorting shadow tankers with Russian Navy ships. If adopted, such a measure would mean that in the event of another interception attempt, French special forces could face not an unarmed crew, but a full-fledged military convoy. Internal Kremlin sources cited by Bloomberg report that this scenario is being actively considered by generals as a final warning to NATO. At the same time, the military acknowledges that escorting tankers with warships would automatically raise the risk of direct confrontation with alliance vessels. This is a step that could lead to a major war, one high-ranking official was quoted as saying. Despite sharp rhetoric, Moscow fully understands that open confrontation with NATO could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, European media are highlighting growing concern. Der Spiegel notes that the detention of the Russian tanker has become a test of Allied unity. In Brussels, discussions are underway on creating a pan-European mechanism for intercepting the Shadow Fleet, which, according to the European Commission, is actively used by Russia to bypass sanctions and supply oil through third countries. Diplomats state plainly that if France dared to take such a risky step, neither Germany, nor Italy, nor Spain can remain on the sidelines. Washington also weighed in. A U.S. State Department representative said France acted in the spirit of protecting European security, though behind the scenes in NATO there are concerns. If Moscow decides to provide naval escorts for tankers, the alliance will have to respond. The Guardian quoted a U.S. official as saying, "We may find ourselves in a situation where a single misfire or collision at sea could trigger a war no one wants to start." Most alarming of all, according to Politico, the Kremlin is indeed considering establishing permanent naval patrols in the Atlantic to cover the transportation of oil and gas. Such a decision could radically alter the balance of power and effectively turn the Atlantic Ocean into a zone of constant confrontation. Thus, the detention of a single tanker has escalated into a global event. France has shown that it is ready to play hard, Russia has been forced to respond, and NATO is left balancing on the edge. The most dangerous aspect of this story is that the stakes have already risen so high that any wrong move could become the spark that triggers a chain reaction, leading to direct confrontation between world powers. The Cold War in Europe seems to be fading into the past. Today, the continent stands on the threshold of a hot confrontation, where each new day brings fresh risks. The question is no longer if, but when the next step will occur that pushes the world closer to the point of no return. The internal reaction in France itself also deserves special attention. According to France 24, fierce debates have erupted in parliament. Part of the opposition accused Macron of dragging the country into a dangerous gamble that could lead to open war with Russia. Left-wing politicians are demanding explanations from the government on what legal basis French special forces acted in international waters, and whether there is a legitimate framework for such operations. At the same time, the government insists that the tanker's seizure was fully legal, citing intelligence data and EU resolutions aimed at preventing sanctions evasion. Yet even within the president's own camp, doubts remain over whether it is wise for France to single-handedly assume the role of Europe's maritime policeman. Against this backdrop, Moscow's propaganda machine is working at full speed. RT and Sputnik present the tanker seizure as proof of the West's true face, allegedly ready to violate any international law in order to pressure Russia. Moreover, Russian telegram channels close to the Ministry of Defense have already begun posting claims that next time French special forces risk running into missiles. Experts note that such statements fuel an atmosphere of escalation, preparing public opinion for a possible military response. The reaction of third countries is also revealing. In Beijing, state media cautiously backed Moscow's position, stressing that international maritime law must be respected by all sides. According to South China Morning Post, China is using this scandal to demonstrate that the West applies double standards and is willing to break the rules when it suits its interests. In the Middle East, particularly in Tehran, reactions were even harsher. Iranian officials declared that France has opened Pandora's box, and now no one can feel safe in international waters. Even more alarming is the split within NATO. The Times, citing diplomats in Brussels, reports that Turkey and Hungary strongly opposed France's actions, arguing that such moves undermine the unity of the alliance. Ankara has already hinted that if NATO becomes entangled in a conflict due to such operations, Turkey reserves the right to distance itself. Thus, Macron's actions have not only worsened relations with Russia, but also exposed old divisions within the alliance itself. Analysts at Carnegie Europe warn that if Moscow decides to provide military escorts for its shadow tankers, Europe will face a stark dilemma: either enter into direct confrontation or back down, which would deal a devastating blow to NATO's credibility. In either case, the consequences will be severe. The first scenario leads to military escalation, the second to political crisis. This is why the detention of one tanker may prove to be only the beginning of a much larger story. A story in which France took the initiative, but whose consequences will affect the entire world, from Washington and Moscow to Beijing and Tehran. And throughout this chain of events, one thought is increasingly repeated: any wrong step will lead to a catastrophe that diplomacy will no longer be able to stop. Experts agree that the current crisis has become Europe's most serious test since the Cold War. The detention of a single tanker has become a trigger, revealing deep-seated contradictions and pushing the world to a new dangerous brink. Today, no one can guarantee that the next provocation won't lead to direct military conflict. While previously this was a localized incident, it's now clear: the very architecture of global security is at stake.